Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are connecting from. My name is Hope Lyons, and I'm with the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this webinar on behalf of the International Grantmakers Network of Philanthropy New York. Philanthropy New York is our amazing regional association of grant makers here in New York, and the IGN is a network of Philanthropy New York for New York-based funders who work internationally. It gives us a space to come together, to meet, to share information, learn with one another, and collaborate. And we certainly find that when you say international funder, it necessarily encompasses a very wide-reaching range of issue areas and geographic focus. And with IGN, we will do some more specific, topic-specific, geographic-specific focus for learning and discussion, but we certainly find that topics such as capacity building, as we'll talk about today, are ones that cut across all of our work, which is why we're thrilled to learn about this report that the Citi Foundation commissioned with Synergos, as it was a topic of great interest across our network at Philanthropy New York. So with that, and with gratitude and thanks, I'm going to turn it over to Dorothy, who's a long-standing member of IGN, to talk about this report and how it came to be.
Thank you, Hope, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be here today to welcome you as well to this webinar, where we'll be sharing insights and best practices from one of the latest reports the Citi Foundation commissioned, Capacity Building Across Borders, a Strategy for Funders and Partners. At the Citi Foundation, we are committed to the economic empowerment of low-income communities around the world in the 85+ markets where Citi has a presence. Part of working to empower these communities means taking a step back to listen, observe, and listen to the kind of support that's needed in order for these organizations to be more effective, impactful community partners. So this report has really given us the opportunity to do just that and to place a spotlight on how important capacity building can be to helping strengthen an organization to drive even greater results and impact in the communities that they serve. So we're really looking forward to hearing the insights from this report from Synergos, as well as to hear from those of you who are joining us today in the space of capacity building, so that you can share your insights on what you are seeing and hearing on how to continue to move forward and effectively deliver capacity building around the world. So I hope you find it both informative and inspirational, and look forward to a thoughtful exchange following the presentation from our panelists. So with that, over to Leah Bradford Francis, Managing Director of Synergos Consulting Services.
Hello, can people hear me? Yes, okay, I see some, thank you. But I'm hearing a bit of feedback. So if I triple over my words, I apologize. So I'd like to provide just a brief introduction to the organization and the genesis of this project before I dive into logistics and details. As background, Synergos is a 30-year-old global development organization. I'm sorry, but my sound is totally off. JT, can you hear me? Okay, let me try something. Okay, can everyone hear me now? Okay. Sorry about that. For some reason, there's a lot of feedback on my end. You may have to restart your Zoom connection. That's what I'm hearing. Okay. Well, let me just continue so we can get into the details of the actual conversation. So one of the things that we've learned throughout this process is that we've been working in partnership for a very long time, and we believe that systemic change fundamentally requires collaboration and that no one organization can do it alone. I'm reading the chat line, so I apologize. So I'd like to actually just move on to the start of the panel and go through a few logistical details. So I apologize, my sound is totally off. So I'm going to actually go to the next slide on the webinar logistics. So everyone is muted at the moment. However, if you have any questions for the panelists, please use the chat function on the bottom of your screen. We will hear from Fern and Connor from Philanthropy University, and we'll field questions at the end of their remarks. And if for some reason you can't hear me, where I can hear myself twice, please dial in via phone, and all slides will be emailed to you at the end. Next slide. Great. And here is what you can see at the bottom of the slide, where you can actually submit questions, and we'll field those at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague Fern Mele, who was one of the core report authors, and she'll go through the details of the report.
Yeah. Okay. I'm getting a thumbs up. So we're hoping that these findings will provide insights and themes that can feed an ongoing discussion for funders and partners who are interested in this topic of capacity building. And I should say, by capacity building, we mean those processes and activities that build the organizational health of an NGO. So those skills, competencies, leadership that allow it to grow and operate. So we talked to 50 individuals from 23 countries, involving NGO professionals and capacity building providers, as well as donors and network organizations and other stakeholders. So enough to get a cross-section of views and geographies. So here are some of the high-level themes that we want to play back in terms of what we heard. The first is that capacity building is receiving more attention. So more and more people in the foundation world are seeing gaps in the organizations they support, and they're asking how they can fill them. As we heard from Hope, this is something that cuts across all of the funders' work. Secondly, we have we have a number of capacity building models that exist that are okay. I'm getting a message that things sound good. They didn't sound good before, so I will continue. So we have several capacity building models. What we heard though is that they don't travel well. So we heard that capacity building really needs to be customized to a local country, to a given country or geography, if not to an institution. We heard about the importance of long-term flexible funding to give grantees breathing room and to support their organizational health, to allow them to invest in their programs and their own organizational strengths. In fact, a few of the foundations we talked to are doing this and have 10-year funding cycles. On the flip side, though, while there's support for increasing support for this kind of more flexible, longer-term funding, it's taking some time for to be put into practice. And in the push-pull between funders and grantees, sometimes the donors might be hesitant to give a lot of discretion to grantees about resources. And it's about much more than resources, whether financial and technical. So there are things like the grantee's stage of development that needs to be taken into account, their own readiness and willingness to go through a learning and change process in order to set up a productive relationship. And so capacity building takes investment in time, in trust, and in deeper relationships. In this respect, the power dynamics are important, and trying to rebalance these power dynamics and keeping an open dialogue between funders and NGOs is important to be able to align objectives and goals and create a shared vision. As not surprisingly, power tends to gravitate towards the entity that holds the purse, and so a relationship that is more more balanced will show a more shared, a more sort of equal plane and a more shared decision making. Finally, we're seeing a movement towards a desire and a movement towards collaboration among different stakeholders and increasing coordination. And there are platforms emerging that have an important role to play in the ecosystem by bringing together funders, providers, NGOs, networks, and associations. And investing in local capacity building expertise can really benefit multiple players in the system. And while investing in infrastructure might not give immediate returns, it is something that is important at the global level, and there are institutions that are making this priority. So against this backdrop, I want to highlight three core themes that emerged from our research, and the common thread that runs through these themes is that there's sort of an advanced work that's required from funders and also from grantees and partners in order to engage in a productive effort towards capacity building. And we call these the internal work, external work, and relational work, as you see on the screen. Where internal work is the process of the funder looking inward and building capacity building approaches into all levels of the organization. External work is the need to really look at the ecosystem in which NGOs operate and what affects them in a positive or negative way. And the relational work is the all-important dynamic between funders and grantees and how to set that up in a partnership sort of way. So let me talk briefly about each one of these core themes. We're defining internal work as really a reflective process whereby values and priorities are reframed, and processes within the funder are restructured to fully incorporate capacity building. And what does that mean? Some of the key takeaways are that reframing needs to happen at the strategic level. What struck us about what we heard from funders who are very intentional about building capacity of their grantees is how they turn their lens inward first, and after interviewing their grantees, really looked at their own organization and strategy, and build capacity, incorporated capacity building as a strategic imperative, not only as a programmatic imperative. In other words, this means that program outcomes are as organizational health outcomes are as important as program outcomes. And there are organizations like the Ford Foundation's Build program, which is a very large initiative to build capacity of 300 organizations. There are other donors such as the Oak Foundation, which went through a deep evaluation and reflection process to incorporate capacity building into the infrastructure. Embedding capacity building into the culture means creating a culture of grant making that values capacity building. And it means doing things like thinking longer term instead of short term, and thinking about the institution, not the project, and the grantee as more of a client than a straight implementer. And the image is one of fellow travelers going down to a mutually agreed path. Revisiting the program officer's role is something that that becomes part of the internal work, in that the program officers tend to be on the front line with grantees, and they might need incentives and training to shift how they engage. Ford, for example, has program officers are now able to make 5-year grants, not just 1-year grants, and are given more leeway within the overall framing. The Open Society Foundation has a unit that's responsible for building a shared culture of grant making across the network with over 500 grant making staff. So these are some of the examples. And all this has to be integrated into the organizational structure, and there are different ways of doing that. We heard from funders who have in-house organizational effectiveness teams that interact with grantees. They may have a portfolio or may not have a portfolio. The Packard Foundation, for example, has a dedicated team that works on organizational effectiveness and working with their country program units. And finally, there are different ways of packaging capacity building. It can be done with grants. The Oak Foundation, Gates, among others, do this. It can be done on top of grants, as Packard and Ford tend to do. It can be just embedded in flexible long-term funding. And I have a quote here from Connor. We're going to hear from him a little bit later. And he says that grant makers and capacity builders are good at pushing civil society to evaluate itself, but often lack such introspection in their own organizations. And I thought this was a good quote to sum up this point on internal work. The external work that's needed is about having an intentional process of understanding the environment, the ecosystem in which partners operate, so that solutions can be tailored and customized. And this means looking at the size and the maturity of civil society in a given geography, and at the number of institutions that are operating, their autonomy. A sign of the maturity of civil society, we heard, is the presence of local capacity building partners. That's a signal that there's an infrastructure in place that can really be of support. Getting to know relevant government regulations and policies to which the institutions are subject is important. Local rules and regulations can apply constraints or limitations on accepting donor funding sometimes, and there's also the fact that in some countries there might be more of an expectation of government, for example, taking care of social programs, and there might be sort of a mindset of having that expectation from the public sector more than private funders. Connecting with local intermediaries is important because they can be allies to the extent that they exist. They can be allies or vehicles for capacity building, and they can help translate the local context and act as bridging organization for capacity building, and in some cases also for funding. This is especially true if a funder doesn't have extensive resources in a given country. Teresa Crawford of an organization called Counterpart International, which does capacity building worldwide, calls this the 5,000-foot long screwdriver. So trying to fix a problem from a very long distance, which doesn't work. So local intermediaries can really play a role. And finally, looking at what other funders and providers are doing. There are funders who have local offices, local philanthropic organizations that can help map the landscape. And as I mentioned before, there's some funders who are serious about building the local system for capacity building. And funders like Oak and the Siegel Family Foundation are doing this. There are other organizations such as Intrac doing strengthening local capacity building internationally. And another interesting area is the digital learning area, where there are global organizations such as Philanthropy University are developing services for the sector and really working to localize them. I have a quote here from the Esquel Foundation, a leading foundation in Ecuador. Boris Cornejo told us that it's fundamental that organizations and funders that are interested in capacity building have a lot of capacity themselves to understand the context and the ecosystem. And finally, I want to go to the third leg of our stool, is the relational work, the relationship between funder and grantee. So investing in an effective relationship that is based on trust and that can support an open two-way feedback and conversation. It's almost like a stage zero in building funder-grantee relationships, where building trust or attempting to build trust is really important. As one NGO said, that you start with shared values and then you move all the way to quality outcomes. And what are some of the takeaways in this sphere? Is as I mentioned before, this question of power dynamics, which kept coming up. And this is a two-way street, but arguably it is the funder who can set the tone for a productive conversation, and create the space for that conversation. So one funder, for example, told us that in their conversations with grantees, they say that they can talk about their weaknesses and it will not be used against them, but it will be part of the learning and the change process. So this is an example of setting the tone for an open conversation that doesn't penalize the grantee for any gaps, but makes them part of the learning process. We heard a lot about assessments, such as the OCAT that are widely used and useful, and we heard that they should really be used as not just a grading tool, but as a way to hold the conversation. So using them as part of a consultative process. And one person said the assessment is really more than one person said that the assessment is really most useful when it's framed as a self-assessment more than a one-way evaluation. And this can help then build alignment on goals and priorities, on the purpose of capacity building, and how it fits within the strategic plan of a grantee. So including the grantee in the diagnostic and in the decision making is advisable, and a way to ensure that there's buy-in from the NGO, from the grantee. And this allows co-designing of the capacity building plan. So it helps ensure that first of all, the grantee has ownership and has willingness to go through the learning process and be part of that process. So one example that we heard is that grantees, one practical example is that grantees should be able to choose their facilitators and providers. And that's a practical way of giving some decision-making power to grantees so that they can choose who they want to work with in the capacity building efforts. And then I want to close with this quote, that an element of co-design is the legitimate feeling that grantees can overrule the funder on how to fill gaps. So this is kind of a desired state of things. And here we have the quote that I read you before is from Monica Aleman from the Ford Foundation about setting the right tone for a conversation and a relationship between funder and grantee. So looking ahead, we find that there's lots of space for ongoing discussion. There's interest in exchange. This webinar itself, we're very happy to to continue the dialogue through this event. And there's room for collaboration, coordination, and for helping to build that local infrastructure that can really boost capacity building efforts globally. And with this, I'm going to pass the word to Connor, who is going to talk about specific capacity building profiles and explore further some of these themes. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Fern. Can everyone hear me okay? Maybe send a chat or an emoji. Okay, great. Wonderful. So it is so good to be on this call, and I first want to thank Synergos, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Citi Foundation, Philanthropy New York, the International Grantmakers Network. It's been such a pleasure participating with you in this journey, and really just sitting here listening, I just want to reiterate again, the importance of this report that Synergos has pulled together and the timeliness of the findings. I've been looking forward to this, and I was reminded of it listening to to Fern and others. It's really nice to be able to nerd out with everyone on these really important topics. And I think Synergos, the report, they just hit the nail on the head. So I'd like to start with just a very high level overview of Philanthropy University, the organization that I lead. So Philanthropy University, we were founded in 2015, and we were continuing the legacy of an organization called the STARS Foundation, which was based in the UK and had over a decade of experience giving capacity building grants to local grassroots organizations. And we realized in 2015 that there was an incredible opportunity to use to build on the philosophy, the approach of STARS Foundation, but to refract it through a technology lens. How could we scale these offerings and also put a greater emphasis on the much needed capacity building? Everything that we do at Philanthropy University is focused on building the capacity of local organizations at scale. To use the wonderful metaphor that Fern mentioned, that we effectively want to use much shorter screwdrivers. How can we, instead of trying to fix, these very complex, gnarled issues from the global north, from the United States, from the UK, where a lot of these organizations rest, how can we better equip local organizations to deliver the tailored programs and services that their communities need? And so everything we do is focused on empowering this local layer through capacity building. So we launched and you can move to slide 19. In last March, we launched with an entirely new platform. And this learning platform, this technology platform, it was built specifically for local mission-driven organizations. It's built to scale. It's built for organizations in low bandwidth contexts. And it's built to provide three layers or three pillars of programming. And those are courses, community, and capital. So courses, we have a number of free online courses that are focused on addressing the most pressing needs of local organizations, featuring those local voices, and really trying to address the skills that are missing in the broader ecosystem. We have also launched the world's largest communities of practice for these organizations. So how can we figure out ways to connect the disparate nodes to enable local organizations to support one another, to share best practices, to provide, again, that kind of horizontal peer-to-peer support. And finally, the final pillar is capital. How can we deploy capital to these organizations in a way that's locally led, that's participatory, and that's done so at scale? One kind of overarching theme to everything that we do is an emphasis on measurement, and our platform is also focused on tracking the organizational capacity of our users, and we have over 3,300 local organizations from emerging economies that joined just in the last year. The platform is designed to track their progress longitudinally over time so that we can better understand how their capacity is improving. So moving on to slide 20, and again, why I am such a fan of the work that Synergos is doing, and a point that they really hit on throughout the report, we're keenly aware that we all need to do better in this sector. You know, we recognize when, you know, in conversations with our local leaders on the ground, the power dynamics that are at play, the importance of right-sizing capacity building support, you know, ensuring that we're actually delivering what's needed when it's needed. And these challenges provide us tremendous opportunity, and these opportunities are so much of what excites the Philanthropy University team and how we can be a real partner and advocate and accelerant of change and improvement in the space. And we see a real opportunity to shift many of these dynamics and challenge the conventions in the service of better understanding what are the dynamics on the ground, and also for funders. How can we better calibrate the system as a whole? How can we better calibrate the needs of the grantees and grantor relationships? You know, and how can we convene spaces to foster those stronger connections and better communication between these different stakeholders? So we can move to slide 21. So yeah, everything that we're doing, we're building mechanisms on our platform to address these challenges around the friction that might exist between grantees and grantors, the power dynamics and the lack of information flow, to better improve these relationships. And one hallmark of our platform, something that we are continually investing in different ways, is balancing that power dynamic. So how can we better equip the local organizations on the ground to have a seat at the table? How can we leverage the expertise, the incredible expertise of local organizations on the ground? And how can we do so at scale? And so we do this in a number of different ways at Philanthropy University. Our courses, while they are scalable, open to anyone, and free, and we have users in over 180 different countries, we do everything that we can to be locally led with what we teach. We consult our users on the content that they need in different regions. We feature practitioners in our courses and subject matter experts. We also leverage the users themselves so that they can drive what's happening on the platform. We have a program called the Course Ambassadors Program, in which we allow local practitioners, kind of the super users on our platform, to support communities throughout. So you can imagine this kind of tree-like structure where the most engaged users on our platform are supporting a network of other users who are then supporting other networks of users, which allows us to scale and leverage this technology. And most recently, we have enabled our learners, these local organizations, to participate in our capital pillar. And what that means is that we've recently launched an awards program that that was we did in partnership with Richard Branson, who is one of our celebrity judges, and an organization called Alquity. And in this program, we allowed local organizations on the ground to submit applications for the award, for the grant, but also to drive the selection. So through our platform, we allowed hundreds of different organizations to vote on who they think was most deserving based on their application and to provide feedback. And this allows, again, these local organizations to have a real seat at the table, to drive the development in a way that's best or most tailored to their needs. And this raises another point. You know, we see a real opportunity to cross-pollinate these experiences, and specifically, we're fascinated by this opportunity to bring together in a really holistic, data-driven way, grant giving and capacity building. We see them as being so synergistic with one another. So, you know, how can we bring grant making and capacity building under the same roof? How can we assess grant applicants' performance against selection criteria, and then identify specific capacity building needs? And then, you know, after that diagnosis, how can we administer the right dosage of capacity building to ensure that the grants that they eventually receive are put to the best use? And this is what we're doing through our awards program. So, you know, everyone who comes in and applies for these grants, we diagnose areas where they can improve. We recommend and push them to our courses, and those who aren't able or aren't ready to identify or to receive funding or awards, we push them back to capacity building so that they have a pathway to that funding. They have a pathway to that support. And I realize that I'm getting, I'm low on time, but jumping around a little here, you know, one of the main takeaways here and reflections that I think have been, that were really nicely addressed by the Synergos report, and that is central to what we do at Philanthropy University, is that we have to be, capacity builders and funders have to be aware of these power dynamics and continually re-examine our interactions with different partners at every stage. And Philanthropy University is included in this. We are committed to being better listeners and to understand how can we serve this crucial local layer at scale. How can we create more solutions that illuminate and surface local leaders' needs and voices? How can we be more participatory in our grant making? In our capacity building and grant making? How can we support funders in their capacity building of their networks? And we're working on a number of really great partnerships that's focused on doing exactly that. How can we encourage and enable funders to be more data-driven and more scalable, more effective with their capacity building, and also begin to blur the lines between capacity builders and funders. And you know, we see this as a journey that we have to go on together with a broad swath of partners, and we're grateful to have been included in this dialogue, and I really look forward to, you know, engaging with everyone on this call, you know, both in the Q&A that's about to come up, but also afterwards, and learning from how we can do how we can meet these monumental challenges together. So with that, I'm a little over time, so I will pass it off.
Great. Thank you, Connor. And hopefully everyone can hear me, and I can hear myself now, most importantly. So I apologize for the technical difficulties I had at the beginning of the conversation. But thank you so much, Connor and Fern, for the overview of the report, as well as the lessons learned and insights. And just to remind everyone, if you have any specific questions for our panelists or our team, please feel free to use the group chat, and then we will try to get to those questions. But my first question is actually for Connor. Speaking of technological issues, which I just had this morning, what do you see from both an opportunity perspective and actually a limitation perspective in the role of technology in capacity building, and that's in the space? And how do you, how should people use the platform to complement potentially offline capacity building support, whether that's organizations using consultants or organizations going to, brick and mortar institutions for support? Would love to hear kind of your lessons learned on the opportunities and limitations when trying to use technology to engage in capacity building.
Yeah, thank you. It's such a good question and something that we think about a lot over here. So in terms of the opportunities, I see two main buckets of opportunities. There are many, but two that I'd like to focus on this call. One is related to data. We at Philanthropy University are tracking tremendous amounts of data that are not possible in conventional capacity building settings. We track every click, every submission of quiz submission or assessment. We do a really thorough organizational capacity building assessment and then track over time. And this data, both our ability to collect it, but also the power of the data set, in the sense that we have to date connected with over 200,000 individuals working in this sector. That allows us to run some really interesting statistical models and data analysis that can guide our behaviors. So, for example, we have, we're working with different with partners and funders to look at and diagnose, what is the performance of these organizations in these capacity building experiences we're building, looking at the peer assessments between them, looking at how they're performing, where they're dropping off. And from that, we can come up with some really data-driven interventions, and we can do so at scale. So I think data is a really big advantage, both the size of the data set, but also the granularity of the data and the replicability of it as well. I think another opportunity with technology is the opportunity to consolidate capacity building resources. One thing that we've seen is that the capacity building space is very fragmented and siloed, in the sense that every single, most NGOs or foundations, they're each doing their own thing. And while it's, there's a lot of great stuff going on, there's also a ton of duplication. And so what we're trying to do is bring together best-in-class partners like Mercy Corps and FHI 360, and how can we surface some of the great capacity building that they're providing? And how can we make it available to the world? How can we, instead of, all the folks across the sector, we all have, we have thousands of different measurement and evaluation courses that we're making. What if we were to pool our resources and just make one incredible, scalable measurement and evaluation course that we could all tap into? And that's kind of that's the vision of what we're trying to do here. So really quickly then, some of the challenges. Look, while I am one of education technology's biggest enthusiasts, I'm also deeply skeptical and wary of folks who say that, well, we can just, we can solve this capacity building problem with an app. Let's just give the folks in the global south, these local organizations, a tablet, and then everything will be good. There is often a deep disconnect between the opportunities that technology affords and the realities on the ground. And what we have to be really clear about, what we have to be really sober about, is the recognition that for many organizations, online only, technology only is not enough. And we do need, as the Synergos report indicated, we need to develop relationships with intermediaries. We need to develop develop learning hubs and communities on the ground that can leverage scalable technology. And it is that pairing of in-person and technology that I think there's actually the greatest opportunity. So I'll stop there. But those are a couple that come to mind.
Great, thank you. And that actually, leads into my next question that's really for Fern, and because you mentioned it very succinctly, the combination of technology and in-person support. And, when you're not physically there, quite honestly, or you don't have, let's say, other program staff on the ground or an office on the ground, Fern, can you kind of talk about how funders kind of solved and cracked that nut when they were, trying to work with other funders in particular geographies, or how they work to engage, how NGOs saw positive engagement locally, just kind of what you saw from a relationship building perspective, especially when they couldn't physically always be there?
Yes, I mean, we heard that there are various ways to get closer to the communities ultimately that want to be served, and that a funder wants to serve, and this can be done by linking with organizations, say in a specific country, who can help navigate the system and map it out. For example, there's in India, we talked to DASRA, which is focused on strengthening the NGO sector in India, where there's more than 3 million NGOs. And they've also created a capacity building framework, and they're an organization that can be a resource in looking at that particular country. They're local intermediaries that can also work directly with smaller grassroots organizations. An example is I don't remember the full name, but it's CIEDS. It's an organization in Brazil that is really connected with small grassroots organizations throughout the country. So they can provide that leverage. There are opportunities for funders to share information and collaborate. For example, some foundations have local offices in given countries and have a lot of local contacts and knowledge. There's the Oak Foundation has and others, not just Oak Foundation, have databases of local consultants with whom they work and that they're willing to share. As well, there are affinity groups of funders and philanthropic associations and groups that are useful in terms of understanding the context and actually working on the ground. And I wanted to mention another, I think, interesting example of collaboration among funders is one where there can be a sequencing. So some funders might work with early stage organizations and are familiar with sort of taking that risk, and others might want to work with more mature ones. And so, for example, the Siegel Family Foundation works with those early stage organizations, and then looks to other donors to take over when the organizations are more mature. The Global Fund for Children is also focused on very early stage organizations, and then gets them to a place where other donors might notice them. So there's a potential for really coordinating action rather than duplication in these different contexts.
Great, thank you. And this is probably a question for you both. And I will start with Fern, because what did we hear from the NGOs from the perspective of what worked for them at the end of the day? What did they value from funders and relationships with funders? What was a positive capacity building relationship where it actually worked very well? And then simultaneously with you, Connor, one of the things you said is, you're trying to be better listeners. And so what are you hearing from the field, and from what are these organizations asking for when it comes to more support on this effort? So let's start with Fern and then Connor.
Yeah, I think the first thing is that when you talk, our first question was actually what, we were asking people to define what capacity building is to them. And we did hear from a number of NGOs who were who kind of saw this term as an imported term that they eventually became familiar with. But so it's important when engaging with local NGOs to actually start the conversation there by agreeing on what capacity building is in the context of that institution. And we did hear that one thing that NGOs appreciate is being treated as sort of an equal partner in addressing a shared challenge. And having the opportunity to engage with the funder and talk about their own needs and do this, engage in a dialogue about what the future is. And we found, NGO leaders are also quite savvy in terms of dealing with the scarcity of resources and taking where they can the support to help strengthen their organizational health, and they can be very creative about finding other support in other ways to develop their own staff and capacities. One thing that also came up quite a bit, and that it resonated with me also because it's something that we pay a lot of attention to in Synergos, is the value of peer learning, of being of funders, and a number of them are doing this, including Citi Foundation, I believe, in terms of convening cohorts of leaders, of grantees, so that they can learn from one another and share their experiences.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Fern. So in terms of what we're hearing, there's a lot of overlap with Fern's reflection. So number one, and this won't be a surprise, one of the biggest things we're hearing from local organizations on the ground is the need for unrestricted funding. No surprise there. This is something that we know is a perennial issue. I think another thing that we hear is, look, they'll say, Philanthropy University, we love your courses. This is like exactly what we need, but we don't have the time. We don't have the kind of clearance from our funders to actually take advantage of these types of resources. We are drowning over here. And so I think that something that's needed is kind of the recognition that these types of capacity building, whether it's online course taking or networking, community-based peer-to-peer exchanges, are really important, and they're important to the funders because they feel like they don't have the time or resources to really invest there. So it's, what we hear from that is how can we create a welcoming environment for these NGOs in which they are encouraged and reinforced for investing in their own capacity. Adding on to Fern's comment, we see a huge demand for community engagement, and this has been a big investment or a big focus of Philanthropy U's work. How can we convene across different programmatic areas, but also geographies, to identify the change makers who have that have really relevant challenges, to learn from one another? And that's so crucial to our belief that this needs to be locally led. This needs to be, again, short screwdrivers. Allow them to engage with and support one another. And then finally, whenever we do user interviews, we just get a lot, we are really reinforced for bringing local organizations to the table, and I hear continually how much they want the opportunity to guide the capacity capacity building that they're getting, not only what, but how, what's the structure. And so those, any attempts to bring them into the fold are often very appreciated by the local organizations.
Great, and I want to get to, there's a few questions from the group that I want to get to if possible, so hopefully people can give us a few more minutes of their time for both Fern and Connor, and this is from Aaron Britton. Can you speak more to the local contextualization of capacity building support? How much can organizational best practices for effectiveness be generalized across different national contexts? And what ways do you actually have to tackle them in a very local context? That's an excellent question. It's really, how do we localize it as much as possible?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So the first response to that is that it depends. It depends very much on the content that we're teaching. So for example, we have a killer project management course. And through the creation of this course, we tapped project management experts and local experts. That type of content generalizes very well and requires less localization. Now, when you think about things like fundraising or advocacy, that needs to be forged in the local context. It needs to be, the local limitations or opportunities need to be woven throughout. And so that type of content requires more localization, more contextualization. Broadly speaking, our approach is first, we are prioritizing content that is more cross-cutting, that is more generalizable. But in addition to doing this for the content that is less, we are working with last mile service delivery models and intermediaries. So for example, we have a measurement and evaluation course that we've created with FHI 360. Again, in the spirit of let's not duplicate the work we're doing. We're making this course available to the world, but in addition to that, we're working with FHI 360 to work with on-the-ground partners to contextualize and localize it in East Africa. We're doing in-person convenings that leverage our mobile app, that leverage the content and allow these intermediaries to build on top of it. So in that sense, we think that, everybody can win. We can provide value at a scale, in a scalable way so that everyone can participate. But then where needed, we can deliver that much stronger, more contextualized, localized dose working with these providers on the ground.
I will just add that one thing we heard a lot about is the importance of of local consultants, and the fact that we're no longer in a scenario where we need consultants from the north or experts from the north to go and advise organizations and help them with their organizational health and growth. And so there's there are local consultants who understand the context, the culture, and are able to take the content and localize it and work with the organization to apply what makes sense for a particular context, and to rule out other goals that might not fit.
Great, thank you, Fern and Connor. And I want to be just cognizant of time because I know we're a few minutes over the hour. So I wanted to just wrap up quickly. I know we have another question, but if you can email us, we'll get you a response back. That may make it easier because I don't want to be too late. I want to thank everyone, especially Connor and Fern, Hope and Dorothy, and all the teams at Philanthropy U as well for your thoughts and insights today. For greater detail and more information about what we learned and what we saw and how to move forward, please look at the report, which I know will be sent to you. If it has not already been sent to you, we'll also be launching it in Spanish as well. So we have a broader distribution. And the actual slides that you saw today will be shared with you via email after the conversation. But thank you all so much for for your insights and thoughts. And again, if you have any additional questions, feel free to email us directly, and we can try to get those responses back to you in a timely fashion, because clearly this is an ever-evolving conversation, and you know, we're happy to continue the conversation. So thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your Thursday.